Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. It's the varsity athlete Jeremy Bodette coming to you with a very, very special report outlining some incredible and disturbing claims that have been made against Vince McMahon. Before we get started, I wanted to mention a couple of things right from the get-go. First thing is, these are not my opinions. I am not passing judgment. I'm not claiming that any of the things that I'm about to review here are right or wrong, truth or false. That's not the purpose. The purpose of this is to take the 64 or 65 pages of the lawsuit that was filed in late January and read it, understand it, condense it down, and share it with you guys. So I don't want anybody to misinterpret this as any kind of endorsement or support of either side of this. I'm going to attempt to be as objective and non-biased as I possibly can in describing this to you, but the lawsuit itself is, of course, written in a biased way. So it's almost impossible to avoid. If my opinion is included, I'll be sure to share that very directly and transparently so that it's very easy for you guys to separate what's being claimed in the actual lawsuit versus what does the varsity athlete think about this particular thing. I think most of my opinion is going to be shared at the end of this video series. The second thing I want to mention is that this is an incredibly disturbing story. If true, if even only part of it is true, it's extraordinarily disturbing and extremely unique. The lawsuit shares testimony in very graphic detail, much of which is not included in the review that I'm going to be sharing with you in this series. But unfortunately, because of the nature of the claims, it is almost impossible to avoid a lot of what's going on. There are very detailed and disturbing descriptions of rape and other disturbing circumstances that just can't be avoided, unfortunately. So please have discretion, not just of yourself, but of those around you, and just make sure that the only people that are listening to this are people that should be listening to it. So without further ado, let's get started. This is the fall of Vince McMahon. Hey gang, welcome back to this very, very special report on the fall of Vince McMahon, the pending lawsuit between Janelle Grant and Vincent Kennedy McMahon III, I think. This is part 3, Miss Grant Goes to Stamford. We're going to talk about what her life is like as a WWE employee, what the very early days at WWE are like. This covers sort of the early summer 2019 time period. This is 3 to 4 months after her initial meeting with Vince in March. Please, if you haven't checked out parts 1 and 2, please do so. Very quickly, in part 2, which was titled The Grooming Begins, we sort of talked about the steady escalation over the first 2 months of their time together into something that sort of started out kind of awkward and innocent and sort of became this very sinister sort of quid pro quo situation with this sort of back and forth, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, throughout the entirety of it, while Miss Grant never seems to, flip the table, as it were, and walk away. Presumably the lawsuit would indicate that that's because of her sort of financial obligations to Vince. She never really runs away, but she also sort of makes it clear in more subtle ways, more indirect ways, that she's not interested in maintaining both a personal and a professional relationship with him simultaneously. Okay, so part 3, Miss Grant Goes to Stamford. This covers early summer 2019. We're going to talk about Miss Grant's first day at WWE. So, on June 17th, 2019, Grant has her first day at WWE. It would appear that for her in this new role, work is very, very hard to come by. The lawsuit indicates that She even struggles to look busy during the workday, that there's like literally nothing to do. And I think it creates this very awkward situation for her where she's sitting in this open office, and there is a brief description in the lawsuit of this. She's sort of sitting in this open office area with very low cubicle walls. She sees everybody else on the phones, answering emails, at the water cooler, complaining about how they're always behind, they can't do enough. And she's having a hard time even looking busy. I think it creates this very awkward dynamic for her. If you've ever been in this situation where everybody kind of knows, you kind of get this in the first day of a first job you have anyways. I think it's something that a lot of us can relate to, where everybody else kind of knows their job and they know what to do, and they're running around looking really busy doing all this work, and you're kind of brand new and you don't really know what you're doing. You kind of have that awkward situation anyways, but it appears to be even worse for her because she can be doing more, but she isn't doing more because she's not being given anything more to do. Sort of hinting at maybe this job is just kabuki theater, that it's just a facade, a Potemkin village to make it look like, to give her something for nothing, essentially, or to give her something in exchange for sexual favors from Mr. McMahon. 2 weeks into her new role, she finally meets her new boss. Remember, this was the member of the Titan family, who I dubbed Vince McMahon's hatchet man, the guy that everybody in the company fears outside of Vince's personal lawyer because he fires everybody. He has been with him for decades, helped make a global juggernaut out of what was a regional promotion in the early 1980s. Finally, after 2 weeks, she finally meets this guy. And it would appear that all these sort of awkward situations come up where they could be sitting as a group talking and Vince's name comes up and he might kind of look at her and say, Grant. He might kind of look at Grant and be like, oh, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, sort of hinting openly that she might have some kind of a personal relationship with Vince. Again, nothing specific, but sort of hinting at, she might know more than other coworkers, or maybe than even he knows about Vince. Grant is quickly trained in the mantras of the WWE business. Examples that are specifically given in a lawsuit, things like, we do what's in the best interest of the company and protect the business. And if Vince ever asks for anything, the answer is never no, but rather, how do we make it happen? So again, establishing this, because again, Vince is the business. It's his baby. He is in complete and total control. He is the domineering figure. He is the alpha and the omega. He is God at WWE. And I don't think anybody inside or outside the organization at that time would argue with that statement. I think it was abundantly clear to everybody inside and outside the organization that WWE is Vince McMahon. And everybody inside WWE was expected to worship Vince McMahon, to do what's in the best interest of the company at all times, to think about how to protect the company and therefore Mr. McMahon, and to never tell Vince no. That's the implication of this part of the lawsuit is we don't tell Vince no. We don't say no. We say, how do we make it happen? Grant's boss is rarely around and requires almost no support. Again, furthering the notion that perhaps this is sort of a fake position and more of an acting position than anything else. So what ends up happening is Grant ends up indirectly reporting to someone else, someone identified as WWE Corporate Officer 4. And this person would appear to be quite smart and is able to make the connection quite quickly that there's something going on between Grant and Vince. Examples aren't specifically given in the lawsuit, but it's just basically said that this corporate officer 4 begins specifically suspecting that there is something going on, something that isn't being revealed, something perhaps personal that's going on between Vince and Grant. She begins acting, I'm sorry, I say she, that's an assumption on my part. They, WWE Corporate Officer 4, begins acting sort of coldly towards Grant. That summer, roughly a month after she starts, in July of 2019, Grant brings up a very specific issue related to the XFL's drug enhancement policy to Vince. The lawsuit does not outline what that issue is. It just kind of says, what I got out of the lawsuit was she basically just raised her hand or wrote an email or mentioned to Vince, like, hey, I was reviewing the XFL's drug enhancement policy and I see an issue, presumably on the legal side of things, because that's the department that she works in. And this causes a pretty dramatic shift in WWE Corporate Officer number 4's attitude. And it begins to escalate from sort of coldness to active hostility. There are a couple of examples of catty, sort of high school office drama type situations that she gets put in, where Corporate Officer 4 and some colleagues will be in a conference room or by the water cooler, presumably talking about something. Grant will enter the room and then they'll, immediately go silent, sort of give a dirty look, and then maybe like disband. That kind of stuff. Stuff that, again, kind of immature, high school-y type things. So the picture that we're getting here in part 3 is that Grant has started this job. It's not busy enough for her. And she begins to get isolated, even though she's working with all these people. She begins to experience this isolation associated. They're busy and she's not. The boss, when he's not around very much, but when he's around, he seems to be identifying her and pointing her out as different, specifically in reference to Vince. Some of the more astute, would appear, members of the team, like Corporate Officer number 4, seem to be picking up on these very obvious hints that are going on and begins acting coldly. And then whatever the result of that conversation regarding the XFL and the way that things were treated sort of tipped her off, and there's a pretty direct escalation between the way the Corporate Officer number 4 starts acting with her in the company. Again, it goes from sort of coldness to actively hostile. So I guess the biggest takeaway for me is the isolation that comes from this. So we have Vince offering her something she feels like she has to take. She takes it, and now, like the monkey's paw, she regrets having it. It comes at a cost. And her relationship with Vince, while it would appear that she needed it in order to get the position that she has, it also isolates her while she's at the position that she has. Moving on to part 4. Part 4 is called Escalation. This covers the time span of the summer of 2019. And this is, we're going to see Vince's presence begin to consume Grant. This is where I kind of talked about a couple episodes ago. As Vince's influence grows, her influence shrinks. As he begins to take over and become domineering, she becomes much meeker, much smaller, much more dependent on him, his whims, his wants. And now that quid pro quo, that sort of physical relationship has been established between the two of them, we're going to see a pretty direct escalation in some of the activities. And we start to see a lot of the really more disturbing accounts between the two of them start to come to fruition now, covering the summer of 2019. So if you've been with us for this long, thank you very much. Please be sure to check out part 4, Escalation, which is probably out now. Keep watching, and we'll keep wrestling with the business.